Today's gospel lesson starts a 4-week series of teaching from Jesus that focuses on getting ready for the kingdom of God in our midst. These readings are not only talking about getting ready for the second coming of Christ. We'll get to those during Advent. They're primarily focused on what happens as God's kingdom starts to break out among us here and now. God's kingdom takes some getting used to, and it is likely to come at unexpected times and in unexpected ways. Jesus has gathered his disciples and tells them that they must be ready. So too, we have to start by getting ourselves ready. Jesus begins in his usual fashion with instructions, followed by a story. He admonishes his disciples, both of old and us today, that their treasures and hearts must align. And then he tells a story of a great banquet, a surprise dinner party. And the talk about readiness in these verses is intended to take in what has just come before. That is, unless we are living the kingdom way, with our money and all of our resources, we will not be found ready because our focus is not on serving our master at all times, but primarily on serving ourselves. If we keep trying to grow our nest eggs as individuals and as churches, and as if as a church we keep only focusing on getting more people in or keeping the folks that we already have, rather than discipling and sending more people already among us out to live as faithful disciples of Jesus Christ, disciples who bless the world by their richness towards God, we'll find we ultimately attract what we're least prepared for, a thief in the night. And conversely, if we're constantly about our mission as Christ's servants, we'll find he calls us to dine with him and serves us when he comes to us again. All is ready for a surprise party. The lamp torches are ablaze with glorious light. Even nature has cooperated as a breeze rafts across the river that runs through this kingdom. And you can hear the sound of the river as people begin to gather. The house is beautifully decorated. Sumptuous food from around the world is prepared, featuring the best of wine purchased at great price, and a delicious braided bread woven together with diverse grains from across the globe. The brass musicians are at the ready, and the multitude of servants are standing by, waiting in a variety of servant attire. Flowing robes tied at the waist, towels over their arms, frilly ribbons, and work aprons, white gloves, and sleeves rolled up, ready to work. All they need is the guest of honor, who is the young master of this house. There's a quirky difference about this surprise party to ones in which we may have been involved. For you see, the custom in this particular kingdom is not for those who prepare the feast to surprise the guest of honor, but for the guest of honor to surprise the preparers. You may think that it is odd, but of course, they would think our way is odd too. And so a waiting game begins. I've neglected to tell you the reason for the party. The banquet is to welcome home the newly married master, the bridegroom. And however, according to the customs of this sovereign Lord, his trick is to arrive at a time they do not expect. They do not know. That is the first surprise. If possible, he wants to catch them unprepared or dozing, or maybe even sneaking a bite of food, of wine, before he arrives. As observers, we may think that this may be an acceptable game for the waiting guests. But not so for the servants. It is a game where they are most at risk. Having worked extra hard to prepare the banquet, they must stay alert and be ready. To be caught dozing would mean at the most scorn and shame, and at the worst dismissal. Their task is to be ready, to give him an honorable welcome, and then rush around for hours and hours waiting on the tables. And what is more is they are supposed to perform their duties with dignified cordiality. No doubt they are even expected to apologize as if it were their fault should a clumsy guest spill a glass of wine. There is not much pleasure lying in store for servants. And yet, there is also a second surprise at this dinner party. Some of the guests sneak some wine and doze off, and the laugh will be on them. And suddenly it all begins to happen. With much singing and shouting, the master arrives at the front steps, and the servants, very much awake and sober, begin rushing in all directions. And the porter flings wide the doors, the head butler bows low, the musicians sound the trumpets, and the master makes his grand entrance. He is delighted that he has surprised some drowsy guests, but his servants are loyally and eagerly ready. But the biggest surprise is yet to come. For you see, this particular young master has his own way of doing things. He knows the best traditions of the past, but he refuses to be bound by them. And since when he arrived to take over this estate, the unexpected has often happened, to the delight of some, but the annoyance of the more proper among his neighbors. Such is this master. And this master calls his servants to stand before him, and they do so with appropriate bowing. And he tells them to remove their aprons. And then he beckons them to the tables and asks them to be seated. And taking an apron on himself and putting a napkin over his arm, he assumes the form of a waiter and commences to wait on each of them. Such is the master's happiness, and such is his affection for his servants, that he can think of no better way of celebrating them than to make them the guests of honor and himself the servant. Maybe a few of the guests enter into the spirit and don an apron and start moving back and forth from the kitchen with the sumptuous food. However, most of the guests are scandalized. Most take the huff and leave. Some gather outside to discuss how they might get rid of this new young master, who is a danger to their established local traditions and certainly a threat to their privileged positions. On the other hand, the servants are at first stunned in silence, and then a bit anxious and nervous, and then pleased, and then finally overjoyed. They realize how much they are appreciated and valued by their young master. In fact, this young ruler of this vast kingdom loves his servants and desires the absolute best for them. In the new era of this master's reign, things are radically changed. Jesus said, "Happy are those servants who the master finds awake when he comes. I tell you the truth, he will gird himself and have them sit at table and he will come and serve them. That is how it is, Jesus is saying. In the new world that God is bringing in, the idea of a servant and master, important and unimportant, are turned upside down. Be alert. Be ready. Be loyal. You will be amazed at the blessings and treasures that God has in store for you. That surprise party and that amazement is ours, my friends. Yesterday, today, and tomorrow. We are citizens in the kingdom of grace, of abundant life, not one of rigid custom and law. There is and always will be grace upon grace, lavish gifts and treasures beyond any wealth, forgiveness again and again, love heaped upon love. Surprising coincidences become common. Such is the lavish hospitality within the kingdom of God. In this story, we are again in the territory of the father who welcomes home his wastrel son by throwing a party, and the grape owner who pays laborers who are not employed until 5:00 p.m. the same wages those who were first to be employed in the morning. Or the woman doing her shopping at the grain market who receives far more corn than she is entitled to, as it is pressed down and shaken together and running over. This is definitely Jesus' territory. You and I are numbered among those happy servants. By rights, we should simply be employed workers at the master's house. Instead, life is a continual surprise party where the guest of honor makes us honored guest, where the master waits on us, washing our feet, tending our wounds, easing our worries, serving royal bread and priceless wine to us. Grace upon grace, love upon love. Our cup is full and running over. Happy are those servants who the master finds awake when he comes. Thanks be to God. Amen.